Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know we love diving into the research you send our way, and today is no exception. We're going to be talking about finding meaning in our work, specifically when it comes to corporate social responsibility, or CSR for short.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating area, especially these days. It seems like more and more people are really looking for a sense of purpose in what they do.
Absolutely, and the research you shared, it takes such an interesting approach. It goes beyond just what companies do in terms of CSR, but it looks at how we as individuals experience it.
Right, because CSR isn't some abstract concept, It's really lived and breathed.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's interpreted by people within an organization.
Right. Okay, so before we get too deep, let's start with a definition. One of the articles from a Guinness in 2011 defines CSR as, and I'm going to quote this here, context-specific organizational actions and policies that take into account stakeholders' expectations and the triple bottom line of economic, social, and environmental performance. But what you're suggesting is it's a little more nuanced than that.
It's not just about checking boxes, It's about how those actions and policies actually resonate with individual employees. It's about how they make sense of them. And that's where this idea of sense-making comes in.
So sense-making is like figuring out what CSR means to me, personally. Like if my company says they're all about sustainability, but then I see a lot of waste happening, how do I reconcile that?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Sense-making is that process that we use to understand our experiences and give them meaning. And when it comes to CSR, it can create these tensions, these dilemmas that we have to kind of grapple with.
So it's not just about whether or not you agree with your company's CSR efforts, but it's about how you internalize them, how they fit into your own values, your own worldview.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that this sense-making happens on multiple levels. So the research that we're looking at here breaks it down into three. We've got the individual level, the organizational level, and what they call the extra-organizational level.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's break those down. Starting with the individual.
Yeah.
What kind of factors are at play there?
Well, think about what's important to you at work. Your values, your motivations, your overall work orientation. Whether you see work as just a job, a career path, or a true calling.
Yeah, I can see how those things would influence how you perceive CSR. Like if you see your work as a way to make a positive impact on the world, like a calling of sorts, you'd probably be more drawn to CSR initiatives.
That's spot on. And in fact, the research actually calls that Proposition 1. People with a calling orientation, they find deeper meaning in their work through CSR. And there's more. Think about your moral identity. How important are ethical standards to you? If they're really central to who you are, you're more likely to resonate with a company that walks the talk on social responsibility.
Right. You want your actions to align with your values. It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
But applied to your work life.
Exactly. And then there are your specific values, like those related to the environment or to community. So let's say you're really passionate about environmental protection. If your company is investing in renewable energy and reducing their footprint, that alignment's going to make your work feel more meaningful.
Because it feels like you're contributing to something bigger than yourself, something you genuinely care about.
And on the community side, if you value social justice and helping others, you'd likely find meaning in a company that supports local communities,
Right.
or that practices ethical sourcing. So all of these individual values, they kind of act as a filter for how you experience CSR. And that alignment can really lead to a stronger sense of purpose in your work.
It's not just about what the company says they're doing. It's about how those actions resonate with your own internal compass. That's when CSR can really make work feel meaningful.
Absolutely. But remember, we've only just scratched the surface here. We still have two more levels of sense-making to unpack. So far, we've been talking about you and your values, but let's zoom out a bit. Let's look at the organization itself.
Okay, so level 2 of sense-making, the organizational level. What's happening inside the company that can impact how employees experience CSR?
Well, one key factor is how deeply embedded CSR is in the company's operations. Is it really woven into the fabric of the business? Or is it more of a side project, something they do on top of their core work?
I'm guessing that embedded CSR, where it's part of the company's DNA, so to speak, would have a stronger impact on employees.
That's exactly what the research suggests. They call it Proposition 5. When CSR is truly integrated into the company's strategy, their operations, their decision-making, it feels more genuine, more authentic. And that resonates with employees on a deeper level.
It's not just a marketing ploy or a PR stunt, it's how they do business.
Right, and it's not just about whether CSR is embedded or not, but it's also about how it's implemented. Is it a top-down approach, where initiatives are dictated by management? Or is it more bottom-up, where employees have a voice in shaping those initiatives?
I can see how that would make a difference. If you're just told to do something, it might feel like just another task on your to-do list. But if you have a hand in creating it, it feels more personal, more meaningful.
Exactly, and the research backs that up. Proposition 6 highlights that those bottom-up, employee-driven initiatives, they're more likely to create a sense of meaning. Because people have ownership and a sense of agency, they're not just following orders, they're actively contributing.
So to create a work environment where CSR truly resonates, it needs to be both embedded and participatory.
That's a great way to put it. Now remember that third level we talked about. The extra-organizational level, that's where things get even more interesting. Because it brings in influences from outside the company.
Yeah, you mentioned things like family influence and even national culture. This is where work life and personal life start to intersect, right?
Exactly. Think about your family and friends. What are their values when it comes to social responsibility? If those values are aligned with your company's CSR efforts, it can actually reinforce your own sense of meaning.
So if your family is really passionate about environmental issues and you work for a company that's a leader in sustainability, it's like getting a double dose of validation.
Precisely. The research calls this Proposition 7. The more your family values social responsibility, the stronger the connection you'll feel to your company's efforts. But it's not just about your immediate circle, it's also about the people who directly benefit from your company's CSR actions.
Right, you mentioned something about having contact with the beneficiaries of those efforts.
And that can be incredibly powerful. Think about it. If you're working on a project that's bringing clean water to a community, and you actually get to meet the people whose lives are being impacted, it makes it so much more meaningful.
It's that human connection, seeing a real-world impact of your work. It's not just an abstract concept anymore.
Exactly. Proposition 8 highlights this very point. Direct contact with beneficiaries leads to a stronger sense of meaningfulness. It adds a layer of purpose that goes beyond simply doing your job.
Okay, we've covered family influence, beneficiary contact. And the final piece of the puzzle is national culture, right? I'm curious how that plays into all of this.
This is where things get a bit more complex. You see a lot of CSR research has been done in Western cultures, which tend to be more individualistic. But there's growing recognition that how people experience CSR can vary across cultures.
So in a more collectivist culture, where community and social harmony are highly valued, would CSR resonate even more strongly?
You might think so, but it's not quite that simple. Proposition 9 suggests that CSR can be meaningful in both individualistic and collectivist cultures, just for different reasons. In collectivist cultures, it's about seeing your company's actions as genuinely motivated by a desire to help others, which aligns with their emphasis on community. But in individualistic cultures, CSR resonates when it's perceived as fair and beneficial to employees.
So it's not just about doing good things. It's about the perceived intention and impact, which can vary depending on cultural context. That's fascinating. But I have a feeling we're not done yet, right? We've talked about these different levels of sense-making, but they don't exist in isolation.
You're absolutely right. What makes this research really interesting is how these different levels interact with each other to shape our overall experience of CSR.
Okay, so we've got individual values, organizational practices, and external influences all swirling around. How do they work together to create meaning?
It's like a recipe, right? You got all these individual ingredients, but the real magic happens when they're combined in just the right way.
That's a great analogy.
And the research really digs into these interactions, looking at how factors within the same level influence each other, and then how they interact across those different levels.
Okay, give me an example. Let's start with those same level interactions.
All right, so remember how we talked about those who view their work as a calling, finding deeper meaning in CSR? Well, imagine someone with that calling orientation also has strong environmental values. The research suggests those two things combined could create an even stronger sense of meaning.
Because they're passionate about the environment, and they see their work as a way to make a real difference. Yeah, it's a powerful combination.
Exactly. And the same logic applies to other individual values. Someone with strong communal values. They might find CSR even more meaningful if they also have a strong moral identity. It's like these values amplify each other.
So it's not just about having one strong value. It's about how those values work together to shape your overall perspective.
Right. Now let's look at an example of a cross-level interaction. Imagine a company with a deeply embedded commitment to sustainability. And let's say they also encourage employees to come up with their own green initiatives.
So we've got that bottom-up approach we talked about earlier. I like it.
Now imagine one of those employees also comes from a family that's really big on environmentalism. Their family is super supportive of their work, even bragging about it to their friends. The research suggests that that family support could actually boost the positive impact of that employee's involvement in the green initiative.
It's like their work is being validated and celebrated outside of the office, too. That would definitely make it feel more meaningful.
Exactly. And if that same employee also had a chance to, let's say visit the community that's benefiting from their company's sustainability efforts, well, you can see how those different levels, the personal values, the organizational approach, and that external connection, all come together to create a truly powerful experience.
This is also insightful. It really highlights the complexity of finding meaning in our work, especially when it comes to CSR. It's not a one-size-fits-all formula.
And that's an important point. Understanding these different levels of sense-making can really empower us to be more proactive and intentional about how we engage with CSR in our own work lives. We can start by asking ourselves, what are my values? What kind of impact do I want to make? And then we can look at our organization. Is CSR truly embedded in the culture? Are there opportunities for bottom-up participation?
It's about taking ownership of your experience
Mhm.
and finding those areas where your values and your work can align to create a greater sense of purpose.
Precisely. And for organizations, the takeaway is clear. If you want to create CSR programs that truly resonate with employees, you need to understand the individual experience. It's not just about ticking boxes. It's about creating a culture where people feel connected, engaged, and empowered to make a difference.
It's about fostering that sense of meaning, both for the individual and for the collective.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, here's a final thought for you to ponder. What kind of sense-making factors are shaping your work experience right now? And how can you use this knowledge to find greater meaning in what you do, whether it's through CSR or any other aspect of your work?
That's a great question for all of us to reflect on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of CSR and sense-making. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a topic you send our way.